A cocky lieutenant threw coffee at a cleaning lady on base and had no idea he just declared war on the general's wife. He thought she was nobody, just another invisible face in a uniform stained by his arrogance. But this quiet woman wasn't here to clean. She was here to expose something far bigger than him. What happens when a man drunk on power finally meets the one person who sees everything and says nothing until it's too late? He thought he could crush her. He didn't realize she held the power to bring the whole system down. When silence is strategic, who really holds the power? Your reactions remind me why these stories matter. If you still believe in the quiet power of love, justice, and truth, then you're part of the reason I keep sharing them. As Morrison strode through the polished hallways of Fort Braxton's administrative building, his perfectly pressed uniform a testament to his obsession with appearance. At 45 years old, he carried himself with the kind of authority that demanded attention, shoulders back, chin lifted, and a permanent look of superiority etched across his face. The morning sun streamed through the windows, catching the gleaming brass nameplate on his office door. Lieutenant, Commander Bradley Morrison, Operations Director. He allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. The position was just another stepping stone in his carefully orchestrated career path, one paved by his father's connections in the defense industry. As he approached his office, he barely registered Mrs. Henderson, the elderly cleaning lady who had worked at Fort Braxton for over 20 years. She was dusting the display cases that lined the hallway, filled with military achievements and awards. "Good morning, Commander Morrison," she said warmly, stepping aside. Bradley walked past without acknowledgement, as if she were merely part of the furniture. In his mind, such people were invisible, necessary but beneath his notice. He unlocked his office door, breathing in the scent of leather and polish that permeated his carefully curated space. Master Sergeant Phillips appeared in his doorway moments later with the morning reports. "Sir, here are the maintenance schedules you requested, and the personnel rotation for next week needs your approval." "Leave them," Bradley said curtly, not bothering to look up from his computer screen. "And tell Lieutenant Rodriguez I want to see him immediately about those substandard performance reviews from his unit." "Sir, Lieutenant Rodriguez is attending his daughter's school." Bradley's head snapped up, his eyes cold. "Did I ask for excuses, Master Sergeant? I said immediately." "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." Phillips retreated, knowing better than to argue. Bradley allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. His father, CEO of Morrison Defense Systems, had always taught him that authority was meant to be wielded, not shared. Those lessons, combined with his family's carefully cultivated military connections, had helped him rise through the ranks at an unprecedented pace. He glanced at his service record displayed prominently on the wall, a spotless history of achievements and commendations. What it didn't show were the strings pulled, the favors called in, the careful manipulation of assignments and evaluations. Not that it mattered. Results were results, and his record spoke for itself. Throughout the morning, Bradley conducted his usual rounds of the base, his presence causing visible tension wherever he went. Junior officers straightened their uniforms, enlisted personnel found sudden reasons to be elsewhere, and civilian staff kept their heads down, just the way he liked it. In the base cafeteria, he watched as young Private Jenkins accidentally bumped into his table, causing Bradley's coffee to slosh slightly. "I'm so sorry, sir," Jenkins stammered, reaching for a napkin. "That's a Section 8 violation of dining facility protocols," Bradley said coldly, making a show of writing down the private's name. "Report to your commanding officer for disciplinary action." "But sir, it was just an accident." "Did I stutter, Private?" "Dismissed." The cafeteria had grown quietly tense, all eyes carefully averted from the scene. Bradley savored the moment, feeling the weight of his authority settle around him like a comfortable cloak. Later that afternoon, he conducted an impromptu inspection of the administrative offices. He found particular satisfaction in pointing out every minor infraction: a stapler out of place, a filing cabinet slightly ajar, a desk calendar not properly centered. Ms. Martinez, he addressed the civilian secretary who had worked at Fort Braxton for 15 years. I see your desk plant violates regulation height restrictions by approximately 1 inch. Remove it immediately. But sir, Colonel Thompson approved. Colonel Thompson isn't here right now, is he? Bradley cut her off sharply. I am. Remove it. He watched with satisfaction as she carefully picked up the small plant, a gift from her late husband, and placed it in her drawer. The slight trembling of her hands only reinforced his sense of power. Back in his office, Bradley reviewed his daily accomplishments with satisfaction. His father would be proud of how he maintained standards and discipline. After all, it was this attention to detail, this unwavering enforcement of authority, that had earned him his spotless service record. He glanced out his window at the parade ground below, where enlisted personnel were conducting their afternoon physical training. From his elevated position, they looked like toy soldiers, pieces to be moved and controlled at his whim. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. It was the base facilities manager, Mr. Thompson, with a maintenance request form. Sir, we need your signature for emergency repairs to the enlisted barracks heating system. Bradley barely glanced at the form before pushing it back across his desk. Not a priority. Submit it through proper channels next month. But sir, winter is coming, and the temperatures… Did I not make myself clear? Bradley's voice carried that edge of authority that had become his trademark. Proper channels, next month. Dismissed. As Mr. Thompson left, Bradley straightened his already immaculate desk, satisfied with another day of maintaining proper order and discipline at Fort Braxton. His father had always said that respect came from fear rather than friendship, and Bradley had built his entire career on that principle. The next morning dawned with Bradley Morrison already on edge. The quarterly Pentagon Review was scheduled for 10 o'clock, and he had spent hours preparing his presentation on Fort Braxton's operational efficiency. These visiting officials could make or break careers, and Bradley wasn't about to let anything tarnish his carefully crafted image. As he made his way through the administrative building's west wing, he noticed a new face among the cleaning staff, an older Asian woman who moved with unexpected grace as she worked. Her gray-streaked hair was neatly tied back, and despite her custodial uniform, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that seemed oddly out of place. That's the new cleaning lady, Mrs. Chen, his secretary informed him when he passed her desk. Started last week. Bradley barely grunted in response. Another invisible person to ignore, as far as he was concerned. Through the morning, he caught glimpses of her methodically working her way through the building. Unlike some of the other cleaning staff who chattered amongst themselves, Mrs. Chen worked in focused silence, her movements precise and efficient. At 9:45, Bradley gathered his materials for the briefing. His presentation had to be perfect. His father had mentioned that one of the visiting officials was a golfing buddy, and expectations were high. He straightened his tie, checked his reflection in his office window, and headed toward the conference room. In the third-floor corridor, he noticed Mrs. Chen speaking quietly with Tom, one of the maintenance workers. Her voice was soft but clear, as she asked about the proper cleaning protocol for some specialized equipment. You're new here, Tom was saying warmly, but you're doing a great job. Most folks don't even bother asking about the right procedures. Bradley rolled his eyes at the unnecessary socializing. The cleaning staff were here to clean, not make friends. He checked his watch, 9:50. Still plenty of time to reach the conference room, but he preferred to arrive early to greet the officials. As he rounded the corner toward the main corridor, his perfectly planned morning began to unravel. There was Mrs. Chen again, this time with her mop and bucket, methodically cleaning the floor. Yellow caution signs marked both ends of the hallway. Bradley's jaw clenched. The conference room was just beyond this section, and this woman was blocking his path. He could see the wet floor gleaming under the fluorescent lights, and Mrs. Chen working her way backward, laying down careful, overlapping strokes with her mop. "Hey!" he barked, causing several nearby administrative staff to jump. "Move this equipment immediately." Mrs. Chen turned calmly, regarding him with dark, intelligent eyes. "I apologize, sir, but this section needs to dry. There's an alternate route through the East Corridor." "Do you know who I am?" Bradley interrupted, his voice rising. He was Lieutenant Commander Bradley Morrison, son of Morrison Defense Systems CEO, and he would not be redirected by a cleaning lady. "Yes, Commander Morrison," she replied evenly, maintaining her composed demeanor. "However, the floor—" "Then you know I have a critical briefing with Pentagon officials in—" He checked his watch again. 8 minutes. Move your equipment." A small crowd of office workers had gathered at the edges of the scene, trying to appear busy while watching the confrontation unfold. Bradley was aware of their attention, which only fueled his anger. How dare this woman challenge his authority, even in this small way? Mrs. Chen stood her ground, neither confrontational nor submissive. "Sir, I understand your urgency, but this is a safety issue. The East Corridor will take you to the same—" "Enough!" Bradley's voice echoed through the hallway. His face had reddened, and a vein pulsed at his temple. "I don't take alternate routes because of cleaning staff. Move aside, now." The silence in the corridor was absolute. Mrs. Chen regarded him for a moment longer, her expression unreadable. Then, with deliberate care, she moved her bucket and mop to one side, creating a narrow path along the wet floor. Bradley straightened his uniform jacket, aware of all the eyes on him. He would deal with this insubordination later. Right now, he had more important matters to attend to. With his briefing materials clutched tightly in one hand, he started down the narrow, dry path Mrs. Chen had created. The rubber soles of his perfectly polished shoes squeaked slightly on the damp floor as he walked, each step carefully placed. His anger at this delay, at this woman's presumption, at the watching crowd, it all simmered just beneath his controlled exterior. 8 minutes had become 5, and he could feel precious seconds slipping away as he navigated the wet corridor. Mrs. Chen stood silently by her equipment, watching his progress with that same maddeningly calm expression. Around them, the office workers held their collective breath, sensing the tension building in the air like an approaching storm. Bradley had just managed to navigate the narrow path Dolores had cleared when he felt the steam of his rising anger. His schedule was tight, and every second counted. He could feel the eyes of the office staff on him, adding pressure to his already boiling temper. His hand gripped his coffee cup so tightly that the lid began to pop off. He glanced at his watch again. 5 minutes. He needed to be in that conference room in 5 minutes, and here he was, dealing with this woman who thought she could dictate his path. The frustration bubbled over as he approached Dolores, who had returned to her methodical mopping, completely unruffled by his earlier outburst. Her calm demeanor felt like a personal affront, a challenge to his authority. Without thinking, Bradley's anger took physical form. In one swift motion, he hurled his nearly full coffee cup at her. The scalding liquid splashed across Dolores's uniform, soaking into the fabric and sending up tendrils of steam. Gasps filled the corridor as staff members looked on in shock and horror. Time seemed to freeze for a moment as everyone processed what had just happened. Dolores stood there, coffee dripping from her uniform onto the freshly mopped floor, her expression unreadable. "You worthless civilian trash!" Bradley spat out, his voice thick with disdain and fury. "How dare you obstruct my path? Do you think you matter here? You are nothing, just a cleaning lady who should know her place." Dolores remained silent, not even flinching at the burning liquid seeping into her clothes. Her dark eyes met Bradley's for a brief moment before she looked away and continued mopping as if nothing had happened. Her movements were steady and deliberate, as though she was determined not to let him break her composure. The office workers exchanged horrified glances but stayed rooted in their spots, too afraid or shocked to intervene. The tension in the hallway was palpable. It felt like the air itself had thickened. Bradley stormed off toward the conference room, leaving behind a trail of anger and tension. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He was already planning how he would explain this delay to the Pentagon officials, maybe blame it on some unforeseen maintenance issue. As he reached the conference room door, he took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down. He straightened his tie once more and plastered on a confident smile before entering the room. Back in the corridor, Dolores continued her work with quiet dignity. The coffee was drying on her uniform, leaving dark stains against the pale fabric. She mopped up the spilled liquid with efficient strokes, while the office staff slowly began to disperse. Tom from maintenance approached her cautiously. "Mrs. Chen, are you okay?" he asked gently, concern etched on his face. Dolores paused for a moment before nodding slightly. "I am fine," she replied softly. "Thank you." Her composed response seemed to heighten the impact of what had just transpired. The office workers couldn't believe what they had witnessed. Not just Bradley's outburst, but also Dolores's unwavering calmness in the face of such abuse. Word spread quickly through Fort Braxton about what had happened in that third-floor corridor. Staff members whispered amongst themselves, recounting every detail they had seen or heard from others who were there. Dolores became a figure of quiet admiration for many on base. Her ability to maintain her dignity despite being humiliated so publicly resonated deeply with those who felt powerless under Bradley's oppressive leadership style. As days passed by after the coffee incident, Bradley noticed subtle changes around him, respectful nods replaced with wary glances, conversations hushed whenever he walked by, an undercurrent of tension that seemed to follow him everywhere. He couldn't shake off an unsettling feeling, like something fundamental had shifted within Fort Braxton after that morning encounter with Mrs. Chen. For Dolores Chen Blackwood, however, this was only beginning phase towards exposing systematic abuse rampant within military hierarchy. And despite outwardly maintaining role as humble cleaning lady diligently performing tasks assigned, inwardly she strategized next steps, carefully documenting everything observed, experienced firsthand during undercover research project aiming at reforming military workplace culture, fundamentally changing dynamics therein forevermore. Dolores knew it wouldn't be easy journey ahead, yet possessed inner strength resilience necessary seeing through till end, ensuring justice served eventually bringing about positive change, benefiting countless others long after personal sacrifices made along way. Thus set stage dramatic unfolding events destined to alter course lives involved, while inspiring hope, courage among those yearning brighter future amidst adversities faced day-to-day basis. And so narrative continued weaving together threads, humanity, compassion, determination, against backdrop, institutional challenges inherent within military structures, ultimately showcasing triumph, spirit over adversity, fostering enduring legacy, impactful change echoing across generations. Dolores Chen Blackwood moved through the halls of Fort Braxton with a calm grace that belied her unassuming role. To most, she was just another member of the cleaning staff. To those who took the time to notice, she was a quiet presence, always attentive, always working with purpose. But Dolores was far more than what she appeared. Behind her serene exterior lay a mind sharp with intellect and resolve. Dolores was not merely a cleaning lady. She was a sociology doctoral student, married to General Harrison Blackwood, the newly appointed commander of Fort Braxton. Her mission here was unlike any other. Dolores had spent years studying workplace hierarchies and social dynamics. When Harrison received his appointment to Fort Braxton, she saw an opportunity to conduct groundbreaking research from the ground up. She wanted to experience base life from the bottom rung, to see and feel what those at the lowest levels experienced every day. With her husband's support, Dolores embarked on this unconventional journey. She remembered the conversation clearly. It had taken place in their modest living room, over cups of green tea and soft light filtering through lace curtains. "Harrison," Dolores had begun softly, "I want to conduct my research here at Fort Braxton." Her husband looked at her with his usual calm demeanor, but raised an eyebrow in curiosity. What kind of research? I want to study military culture and workplace hierarchies from within, she explained, but not as your wife or a sociologist. I want to be part of the staff, one of them. Only then can I truly understand their struggles and dynamics. Harrison had taken a long sip of his tea before responding. Dolores, you know this could be risky. The military environment is not always forgiving. She nodded, fully aware of the challenges ahead. I know, but it's important work. If we can understand the roots of toxic behavior and find ways to address them, we can make real changes. After a moment's pause, Harrison reached across the table and took her hand. All right, he said firmly. We'll do it your way. With that decision made, Dolores began her new life undercover at Fort Braxton. Her silence during Bradley's attack wasn't submission, but strategic observation as part of her research methodology. She needed to see how far someone like Bradley would go when he believed no one important was watching. Now, as she mopped up the last remnants of coffee from the floor, Dolores's mind raced with thoughts and plans. The coffee incident was more than just an act of cruelty. It was a pivotal moment in her research, a clear display of abuse of power that needed documenting. Later that evening, Dolores sat at a small desk in her modest quarters on base, a stark contrast to the spacious home she shared with Harrison off base. She opened her laptop and began typing detailed notes about the incident with Bradley Morrison. His demeanor, his words, the reactions of those around them. As she typed, there was a knock at her door. She knew who it would be even before opening it. Evening, Harrison said softly as he stepped inside. Evening, she replied with a gentle smile. He looked around at the sparsely furnished room before turning his attention back to her. How are you holding up? Dolores sighed but nodded reassuringly. I'm fine, she said earnestly. It's all part of the plan. Harrison sat down across from her desk and glanced at her notes on the laptop screen. He frowned slightly as he read through them silently. This Bradley Morrison, he's worse than I expected, Harrison admitted after a moment. Yes, Dolores agreed quietly. But this is exactly why I'm here, to expose these behaviors and find ways to prevent them. Harrison looked at his wife with deep admiration, mixed with concern for her safety amidst such toxic environment. I trust you know what you're doing, he said finally, reaching out to gently squeeze her hand. Thank you, Dolores replied sincerely. Your support means everything. They spent some time discussing next steps for documentation process, ensuring every detail captured accurately without raising suspicions among personnel around base. Meanwhile, news about coffee incident continued spreading like wildfire among staff members, creating ripple effects throughout entire base community, impacting morale significantly. Next day during routine cleaning rounds, Dolores couldn't help noticing subtle changes, atmosphere around corridors' offices. Staff members greeted warmly, now showing signs, respect, admiration, despite outwardly maintaining professional demeanor required military protocol. In cafeteria later that afternoon, another interesting encounter took place involving group junior officers quietly discussing recent events-related coffee incident. As soon they noticed, presence quickly fell silent, exchanging wary glances, clearly unsure how much overheard by unassuming cleaning lady passing by. Dolores pretended not noticing anything unusual, continuing tasks, diligently observing interactions closely, making mental notes, further analysis later. As days turned into weeks, accumulated wealth, invaluable data documenting various aspects, hierarchical dynamics within military setting, revealing patterns, behaviors previously overlooked or ignored entirely higher-ups. Throughout process maintained regular communication, husband sharing findings, insights, ensuring proper channels followed without compromising integrity research project. And so Journey continued uncovering layers, complexity inherent within structured environments, like military bases, shedding light, dark corners often hidden away under facade order discipline. Each encounter experience added pieces, puzzle gradually forming clearer picture, ultimately aiming towards meaningful change, benefiting countless individuals, future generations alike. Bradley's behavior toward Dolores escalated rapidly in the days following the coffee incident. It seemed that hurling scalding liquid at her had emboldened him. Each time he saw her, a sneer would curl his lips, and his eyes would darken with barely concealed contempt. He treated the coffee incident as his way of establishing dominance, and it made him feel powerful. Dolores continued to move through the halls with her usual grace and composure, but she now had to steel herself for each encounter with Bradley. She knew he was watching her, waiting for any opportunity to belittle and intimidate her. Yet she never wavered from her mission. One morning, as Dolores mopped the floor outside the officers' quarters, Bradley stormed down the hallway, his polished boots clicking sharply against the tiled floor. He didn't even slow down as he approached her. "Out of my way, trash!" he barked, shoving past her so forcefully that she stumbled against the wall. Dolores regained her balance and continued mopping without a word. She could feel his eyes boring into her back, but she didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Bradley's aggression wasn't limited to Dolores. He began targeting other cleaning staff members as well. There was Mrs. Martinez, an older woman who had been working on base for over 20 years. One afternoon, Bradley found her cleaning the officers' mess hall. "What are you doing here?" he snapped, his voice dripping with disdain. Mrs. Martinez looked up from her work, startled. "Just cleaning, sir." "Cleaning? This place is still filthy," he shouted, kicking over a bucket of soapy water that splashed across the floor and onto Mrs. Martinez's shoes. Tears welled up in Mrs. Martinez's eyes as she hurried to clean up the mess, but Bradley wasn't finished. "If you can't do your job properly, maybe you should find somewhere else to work." Dolores watched from a distance, documenting every detail in her mind. She felt a pang of sorrow for Mrs. Martinez, but knew she had to remain strong for all of them. Bradley's behavior continued to escalate in public spaces, where everyone could see his tyrannical displays. In the dining hall one evening, Dolores noticed him berating a young janitor named Kevin, who was just trying to clear away some trays. "Can't you move any faster?" Bradley yelled loud enough for everyone in the hall to hear. Kevin's hands trembled as he hurried to comply. "Sorry, sir," he muttered under his breath. "Sorry doesn't cut it. Maybe if you weren't so useless, this place wouldn't be such a disaster." Bradley's voice was harsh and cutting. The other staff members exchanged worried glances but remained silent. They all knew better than to challenge Bradley's authority openly. Meanwhile, Dolores methodically documented every incident she witnessed or experienced herself. She kept detailed notes on her laptop each night in her quarters, descriptions of Bradley's actions, words spoken during altercations, reactions from witnesses, all carefully recorded with timestamps and dates. Dolores also made sure to note any patterns she observed, how Bradley seemed to single out those he perceived as weaker or more vulnerable, how his anger flared most when he felt challenged or disrespected, how his abuse was becoming more frequent and severe over time. One particularly harrowing incident occurred late one evening when Dolores was emptying trash bins near the barracks entranceway. Bradley appeared out nowhere, grabbing arm roughly spinning around face to face. "What do you think you're doing?" he demanded harshly. "Just doing my job," Dolores replied calmly, meeting gaze unwaveringly. "Your job? Ha! More like slacking off." He sneered, tightening grip momentarily before releasing abruptly, causing stumble slightly backward. She caught herself quickly resumed task without another word, silently counting seconds, until finally stalked away, fuming visibly. Back in quarters later that night added latest encounter, detailed logs feeling mixture exhaustion, determination, fueling resolve continue mission, exposing truth hidden beneath layers, military bureaucracy facade, order discipline. The pattern abuse becoming increasingly clear, widespread, affecting not only cleaning staff, enlisted personnel alike, creating toxic work environment, permeated fear, intimidation, constant vigilance, avoid drawing ire, superior officer unchecked power, unchecked aggression, unchecked arrogance, driving force behind actions, destructive ripple effects throughout entire base community, impacting morale, productivity overall, well-being individuals subjected relentless mistreatment daily basis. As days turned into weeks, accumulated mountain evidence documenting various aspects, hierarchical dynamics within military setting, revealing stark contrast between outward appearance, efficiency, discipline, underlying reality, plagued systemic issues, toxic behaviors, ignored, overlooked, entirely higher-ups, unaware, severity situation unfolding right under noses, hidden plain sight behind masks, professionalism, protocol decorum, maintaining outward semblance order control amidst chaos, brewing beneath surface. Throughout process maintained regular communication, husband sharing findings, insights, ensuring proper channels followed without compromising integrity, research project, ensuring every detail captured accurately, building ironclad case against systematic abuse, power aiming towards meaningful change, benefiting countless individuals, future generations alike, paving way towards brighter, more equitable future within military institutions worldwide. Shedding light, dark corners often hidden away under guise, authority, command, respect, genuine leadership, rooted empathy, understanding, mutual respect, fostering positive, healthy work environments, conducive growth, development success, everyone involved, regardless, rank, position, status, background, ultimately striving. Create world better place. Us all live, thrive together. Harmony, unity, strength, compassion, justice, fairness, dignity, humanity, collective shared vision, hope, brighter tomorrow. And so journey continued, uncovering layers, complexity inherent within structured environments like military bases, shining light, truth often obscured shadows, darkness, ignorance, apathy, indifference, bringing forth clarity, understanding, paving path towards transformation, healing, restoration, justice, fairness, equity, progress, prosperity, peace, unity, love, kindness, compassion, grace, mercy, forgiveness, reconciliation, redemption, renewal, revival, rebirth, hope, faith, courage, strength, perseverance, resilience, fortitude, endurance, determination, unwavering commitment, unwavering dedication, unwavering resolve, unwavering purpose, unwavering mission, unwavering vision, unwavering dream, fulfilling potential, achieving greatness, reaching heights unimaginable, surpassing boundaries, breaking barriers, transcending limitations, soaring heights beyond wildest dreams, reaching stars, touching sky, embracing infinite possibilities, endless opportunities, limitless horizons, boundless adventures, uncharted territories, unexplored realms, undiscovered worlds, awaiting discovery, exploration, revelation, realization, fulfillment, destiny calling, beckoning, inviting, welcoming open arms, hearts, minds, souls, spirits intertwined, connected, united, bonded, eternal, everlasting, forever, timeless, ageless, infinite, boundless, limitless, eternal, unbreakable, unshakable, unyielding, unending, undying, eternal, infinite, timeless, ageless, boundless, limitless, eternal, everlasting, forever. Staff Sergeant Rita Valdez moved with practiced efficiency as she cleaned the base's West Wing corridors. Her movements were precise and purposeful, reflecting years of military discipline that couldn't be erased by her current custodial uniform. Despite the change in her duties, she carried herself with the same pride that had earned her multiple combat decorations during her Special Forces service. At 35 years old, Rita's tough, wiry frame still displayed the physical conditioning of her military training. Her alert dark eyes constantly scanned her surroundings, a habit formed during multiple combat tours that her post-traumatic stress disorder had only intensified. The sound of a door slamming somewhere down the hall made her flinch slightly, but she quickly steadied herself and continued working. 3 years ago, Rita had been leading elite tactical teams through some of the world's most dangerous territories. Now she pushed a cleaning cart through Fort Braxton's hallways. The demotion had come after a series of PTSD-related incidents, including a severe flashback during a training exercise that had nearly ended in tragedy. Rather than discharge her completely, her commanding officer had offered her this position, a chance to stay connected to the military life that had defined her for so long. "At least I'm still serving, even if it's with a mop instead of a rifle," Rita often reminded herself. She took pride in keeping the base spotless, applying the same attention to detail she'd once used in planning combat operations. As she worked, Rita couldn't help but notice Lieutenant Commander Bradley Morrison's increasingly aggressive behavior toward the cleaning staff. She'd witnessed several of his outbursts, including the coffee incident with Dolores. Each time, her military training had urged her to intervene, but her precarious position forced her to remain silent. One morning, as Rita cleaned the officers' conference room, she overheard Bradley berating a young private in the hallway. The familiar sound of emotional abuse made her hands tighten around her broom handle. She knew that tone all too well. It was the voice of a bully hiding behind his rank. "Watch where you're going, you incompetent fool!" Bradley's voice boomed through the doorway. Rita stepped into the hallway just in time to see the young private scrambling to pick up scattered papers, his face red with humiliation. Bradley stood over him, seemingly enjoying the soldier's distress. "Sir," Rita spoke up, her voice carrying the natural authority of her years as a staff sergeant. "Let me help with that." Bradley's head snapped toward her, his eyes narrowing as he took in her custodial uniform. "Stay out of this, janitor. This doesn't concern you." "Staff Sergeant Rita Valdez, sir," she corrected him firmly, emphasizing her rank. "Special Forces, 7th Group." Bradley's face darkened with anger at her defiance. "Former Staff Sergeant," he sneered, stepping closer to her. "Now you're just another civilian employee who needs to learn her place." Rita held her ground, meeting his gaze steadily. Her combat-trained instincts assessed him automatically. Poor stance, telegraphed movements, more bluster than actual threat. But she forced herself to remember her current position. "Of course, sir," she replied, her tone perfectly regulation respectful, while her eyes remained hard as steel. "I'll return to my duties." From that moment on, Bradley seemed to take particular pleasure in targeting Rita. He would appear during her shifts, deliberately creating messes for her to clean or finding fault with her work. Each encounter became a test of Rita's self-control as she fought to manage both her PTSD triggers and her growing anger at his abuse of power. One afternoon, Bradley found Rita cleaning the fitness center. He deliberately knocked over a rack of towels she had just finished folding. "Oops," he said with a cruel smile. "Looks like you missed some. Better get back to work, former Staff Sergeant." Rita's hands trembled slightly as she bent to pick up the towels, but not from fear. She was fighting back the combat responses that had been drilled into her through years of Special Forces training. The sound of Bradley's mocking laughter triggered memories of other conflicts, other battles. "Having trouble focusing?" Bradley taunted, noticing her slight tremor. "I heard about your little episodes. No wonder they stuck you with a mop. Can't trust someone who might snap at any moment, can they?" Rita continued picking up the towels, using the mundane task to ground herself in the present moment. She concentrated on her breathing, just as her therapist had taught her. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Each breath helped push back the memories of gunfire and explosions that threatened to overwhelm her. "Nothing to say?" Bradley pressed, clearly disappointed by her lack of response. "Maybe you're finally learning your proper place around here." Rita straightened up, towels neatly folded in her arms. "Will there be anything else, sir?" she asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Bradley stepped closer, invading her personal space. "Just remember, Valdez, you're nothing but a custodian now. All your fancy combat experience doesn't mean anything anymore. You're just another piece of base trash for me to deal with." As he stormed out of the fitness center, Rita carefully placed the folded towels back on the rack. Her hands were steady now, her breathing controlled. She had survived worse things than Bradley Morrison's petty tyranny. But as she watched him leave, she knew this conflict was far from over. The former staff sergeant in her recognized the signs of escalating aggression, and she wondered how long it would be before someone got hurt. The morning sun streamed through Fort Braxton's windows as Rita methodically mopped the administrative wing's floor. The familiar scent of coffee wafted through the hallway as officers arrived for their early meetings. She kept her movements steady and precise, maintaining the same discipline that had served her well in combat zones across the world. Lieutenant Commander Bradley Morrison rounded the corner, coffee cup in hand, engaged in what appeared to be a heated phone conversation. "I don't care what the regulations say," he barked into his phone. "Make it happen." Rita continued her work, keeping her eyes focused on the task at hand. She had learned to make herself invisible during Bradley's rages, but today something was different. His face was flushed with anger as he ended his call, and his eyes locked onto her like a target. "You missed a spot," Bradley sneered, deliberately stepping onto her freshly mopped floor with his polished shoes. Rita's jaw tightened, but she remained silent, adjusting her path to clean around him. The morning light caught the steam rising from his coffee cup as he took an aggressive step toward her. "I'm talking to you, janitor," Bradley spat out the last word like an insult. "Or is your PTSD acting up again? Can't hear me over the explosions in your head?" Rita's hands tightened around the mop handle, her knuckles turning white. She could feel her combat training humming through her muscles, urging her to respond to the threat. But she forced herself to stay calm, remembering everything she had worked for. "No, sir," she replied evenly. "I hear you just fine." Bradley's face twisted with rage at her composed response. "Then move out of my way!" He shoved her roughly with his free hand, causing her to stumble backward. Hot coffee sloshed over the rim of his cup, splashing across her uniform. In that instant, Rita's world narrowed to a tactical assessment. Her body automatically shifted into a defensive stance, years of Special Forces training taking over. Time seemed to slow as her mind calculated angles, distances, and potential weapons. The mop in her hands could become a staff, the bucket a projectile. "Staff Sergeant Valdez!" Dolores's voice cut through Rita's combat focus like a lifeline. The older woman appeared beside them, her presence somehow filling the hallway despite her small stature. "Take a breath." Rita blinked, suddenly aware that she had moved into a fighting position. Bradley had taken a startled step backward, his coffee cup trembling slightly in his hand as he recognized the deadly capability in her stance. "You're unstable," Bradley sputtered, trying to regain his authority. "This is exactly why you were demoted. You're a danger to everyone around you." "The only danger I see here is you, Lieutenant Commander," Dolores said quietly, stepping between them. Her voice carried an unexpected weight of authority that made both Rita and Bradley pause. "Stay out of this, cleaning lady," Bradley snapped, but there was a note of uncertainty in his voice. "I think we all need to step back and consider our actions carefully," Dolores continued, her calm dignity a stark contrast to Bradley's aggression. She turned to Rita, meeting her eyes with understanding. "Sergeant Valdez, would you help me in the supply room? I believe we need more cleaning solution for this spill." Rita recognized the lifeline being offered. She forced her breathing to slow, consciously releasing the tension in her muscles. "Yes, ma'am," she replied, hearing the tremor of adrenaline in her voice. As they walked away, Bradley called after them, "This isn't over! I'll have both of you written up for insubordination." In the privacy of the supply room, Rita's hands began to shake as the combat energy drained from her system. Dolores quietly closed the door and turned to face her. "You handled that well," Dolores said softly. "Better than most would have." Rita let out a shaky breath. I could have seriously hurt him." "But you didn't," Dolores pointed out. "You maintained control despite severe provocation." "How did you know?" Rita asked, studying the older woman with new eyes. "About my rank, my training?" Dolores smiled slightly. "I observe. It's what I do." just as I've observed Lieutenant Commander Morrison's escalating pattern of abuse. He's getting worse, Rita agreed, rubbing the coffee stain on her uniform. Today was the first time he's gotten physical, but I doubt it will be the last. No, Dolores said thoughtfully. It won't be, which is why we need to work together. Rita straightened, recognizing the strategic tone in Dolores's voice. It was the same tone she had used when planning operations with her team. You're not just a cleaning lady, are you? No more than you're just a janitor, Dolores replied. We both have our reasons for being here, Sergeant Valdez, and I believe we can help each other. I'm listening, Rita said, her military training responding to the implicit mission briefing in Dolores's words. Morrison's behavior needs to be documented and reported through proper channels, Dolores explained. But it needs to be done carefully, methodically. Your military background and my particular position could make that possible. Rita nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. You've been gathering evidence. Yes, Dolores confirmed, and now I could use a partner with your particular set of skills. For the first time in months, Rita felt the familiar surge of purpose that had driven her military career. Count me in, she said firmly, extending her hand to Dolores. As they shook hands, both women recognized the strength and dignity in each other. Their unlikely alliance was forged in that moment, built on a shared determination to end Bradley's reign of terror at Fort Braxton. Bradley Morrison strode into his office, slamming the door behind him. His morning coffee sat untouched on his desk as he scrolled through a growing stack of official complaints on his computer screen. His hands trembled slightly as he read report after report detailing incidents of verbal abuse, intimidation, and now physical assault. This is ridiculous, he muttered, reaching for his phone. He punched in the extension for human resources. Sharon, I need you to bury these complaints. Use whatever excuse you need. Incomplete paperwork, missed deadlines, whatever. There was a long pause on the other end. I'm sorry, sir, Sharon replied, her voice firm. But these reports have already been logged in the system and forwarded to the Inspector General's office. I can't override that process. Bradley's face flushed red. What do you mean you can't override it? Do you know who my father is? With all due respect, sir, that's part of the problem, Sharon said before disconnecting the call. He stared at the phone in disbelief. Sharon had always been cooperative before, helping him manage his personnel issues quietly. But something had changed. The usual channels of influence that had protected him throughout his career were suddenly closing. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Captain Rodriguez, his direct superior, entered without waiting for a response. His expression was grave as he closed the door behind him. We need to talk, Morrison, Rodriguez said, placing a tablet on Bradley's desk. Security footage from the past month. Care to explain? Bradley's stomach dropped as he watched crystal-clear video of himself throwing coffee at Dolores, shoving Rita Valdez, and berating countless other staff members. The timestamps showed a clear pattern of escalating behavior. These people are subordinates, Bradley protested, trying to maintain his usual authoritative tone. Sometimes they need a firm hand to maintain discipline. A firm hand? Rodriguez's voice was cold. What I'm seeing is systematic abuse of power. 3 separate departments have filed official complaints. The Inspector General's office is involved now. This is obviously a coordinated attack on my authority, Bradley said, standing up to pace behind his desk. These people are conspiring against me. I'll have them all written up for insubordination. Sit down, Lieutenant Commander, Rodriguez ordered. Bradley slowly sank back into his chair, unused to being on the receiving end of such commands. Your threats aren't helping your case. In fact, we've received reports that you've been trying to intimidate witnesses. Bradley's confident facade cracked slightly. Who's making these accusations? It would be easier to list who isn't, Rodriguez replied. Your behavior has created a hostile work environment that affects this entire base. The cleaning staff, administrative personnel, even junior officers have come forward. They're lying, Bradley insisted. but his voice lacked conviction. Rodriguez tapped the tablet, bringing up more footage. The cameras don't lie, Morrison. And neither do the dozens of sworn statements we've collected. This isn't just about you anymore. This is about a systemic problem that we've allowed to fester. Bradley's phone buzzed with an incoming email. His eyes widened as he read the subject line. Official Notice of Investigation, Inspector General's Office. Your father's connections won't help you this time, Rodriguez said, noting Bradley's reaction. The Inspector General is particularly interested in how you've managed to avoid any negative reports until now. Who's been covering for you? Who's been helping you suppress complaints? I don't know what you're talking about, Bradley said weakly, but the mounting evidence was overwhelming. His carefully constructed world of privilege and power was crumbling around him. Your security clearance has been temporarily suspended, Rodriguez continued. You're to report to administrative duty effective immediately. No contact with base personnel outside your immediate chain of command. You can't do this to me, Bradley protested, his voice rising. I'm Lieutenant Commander Bradley Morrison, my father Dash. Your father's company is also under investigation, Rodriguez cut him off. The Inspector General is looking into whether your rapid promotions were influenced by defense contracts. This goes deeper than just your behavior, Morrison. You're the symptom of a larger problem. Bradley slumped in his chair, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. The security footage continued to play silently on the tablet, showing incident after incident of his abuse of power. He watched himself on screen, seeing for the first time how others saw him. Not as the powerful figure he imagined, but as a bully using his position to terrorize those he considered beneath him. Report to personnel by 0900 hours tomorrow, Rodriguez said, picking up the tablet. They'll have your temporary assignment ready. And, Morrison, if I hear about any attempts to contact witnesses or influence this investigation, you'll be facing additional charges. Is that clear? Yes, sir, Bradley replied automatically, his voice barely above a whisper. As Rodriguez left the office, Bradley stared at his reflection in his computer screen. His perfectly pressed uniform and military bearing seemed like a costume now, a facade hiding the truth that everyone else could finally see. The carefully constructed system that had protected him for so long was being dismantled, piece by piece, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. His phone continued to buzz with new notifications, more complaints, more reports, more evidence of his systematic abuse. The wall of privilege he had hidden behind for his entire career was crumbling, exposing him to the consequences of his actions for the first time. The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Braxton's parade ground as hundreds of personnel gathered for an unprecedented all-hands meeting. General Harrison Blackwood stood at the podium, his silver hair catching the early light. His presence commanded attention as he surveyed the assembled crowd. Recent events have brought to light serious concerns about leadership conduct at Fort Braxton, General Blackwood began, his voice carrying across the silent formation. Effective immediately, I am launching a comprehensive investigation into all command-level positions and their treatment of subordinate personnel. Bradley Morrison stood rigid in his section, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. His eyes darted nervously between his fellow officers, noting their reactions to the announcement. This investigation will be thorough and impartial, Blackwood continued. We will examine every complaint, every incident report, and every piece of evidence. No one is above scrutiny, regardless of rank or connections. The general's words sent a ripple of murmurs through the crowd. Bradley noticed several senior officers shifting uncomfortably, perhaps wondering if their own conduct would face examination. After the assembly, Bradley retreated to his office, now stripped of most of his authority. He obsessively searched through personnel files, trying to understand how things had spiraled so far out of control. A notification popped up on his computer, a new batch of security clearance updates. His eyes widened as he scrolled through the list. There it was. Dolores Chen Blackwood, Special Research Authorization. Bradley's coffee mug crashed to the floor. Blackwood, he whispered, the pieces suddenly falling into place. The cleaning lady wasn't just some civilian worker, she was the general's wife. All this time she had been watching, documenting, gathering evidence. His hands shook as he pulled up her complete file. Doctoral candidate in sociology, authorized research project on military workplace hierarchies, special access granted by base command, by her husband. She played me, Bradley muttered, pacing his office. She let me abuse her, let me make a fool of myself while she built her case. Rage and panic fought for dominance in his mind as he realized how thoroughly he'd been outmaneuvered. But then a desperate idea took root. He quickly pulled up the base security protocols regarding unauthorized intelligence gathering. If he couldn't fight the abuse allegations, maybe he could discredit the source. Bradley spent the next hour crafting a formal security complaint. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he twisted Dolores's research into something sinister. He painted a picture of unauthorized surveillance, of sensitive information being gathered under false pretenses, of potential security breaches that could compromise base operations. Request immediate investigation into civilian contractor Dolores Chen Blackwood for unauthorized intelligence gathering and security protocol violations, he wrote, his desperation evident in every word. Subject has been observed documenting restricted areas and personnel movements under the guise of janitorial duties. He attached carefully selected security footage, taken out of context, showing Dolores taking notes and photographing various base locations. What had been approved research documentation now appeared suspicious through his desperate framing. Furthermore, he continued typing, subject has been gathering personal information about military personnel without proper authorization or disclosure of intent. This represents a serious breach of operational security. Bradley's hands trembled as he hit send. The complaint would go directly to base security and the Inspector General's office, bypassing the normal chain of command. He knew it was a desperate move, but he was running out of options. Within an hour, his office phone rang. His heart nearly stopped when he saw the caller ID, General Blackwood's office. Lieutenant Commander Morrison, the general's voice was carefully controlled. Report to my office, immediately. Bradley's legs felt like lead as he walked the longest 100 yards of his career. The general's aide wordlessly ushered him into the office, where both General Blackwood and Dolores waited. She sat calmly in a chair, still wearing her custodial uniform, while her husband stood behind his desk. Sit down, Morrison, Blackwood ordered. Bradley sank into a chair, unable to meet either of their eyes. I have here, the general held up a tablet, your rather creative interpretation of my wife's fully authorized research project. Would you care to explain your allegations? Sir, Bradley's voice cracked. I was concerned about security protocols. No, Morrison, Blackwood cut him off. You were concerned about saving yourself. Every photograph, every note, every observation my wife made was approved through proper channels. Your desperate attempt to frame her as a security risk only proves what her research has uncovered about toxic leadership. Dolores spoke for the first time, her voice steady and professional. My research focuses on how power structures can enable abuse when left unchecked. Your reaction to discovery, Lieutenant Commander, provides a perfect case study in how privileged authority figures respond when their power is threatened. Bradley slumped in his chair, his last desperate gambit having backfired completely. He had tried to paint Dolores as an infiltrator, only to expose himself as exactly the kind of leader her research was meant to identify. Your security complaint has been added to the evidence file, General Blackwood said. The Inspector General will be particularly interested in how you attempted to weaponize security protocols for personal retaliation. The magnitude of his failure crashed down on Bradley. In trying to discredit Dolores, he had only succeeded in proving her point about the abuse of power. His desperate counterattack had become yet another example of the very behavior under investigation. General Blackwood opened a thick manila folder on his desk, spreading out dozens of meticulously organized documents. Mrs. Chen Blackwood, would you please walk us through your findings? Dolores stood up, her custodial uniform a stark contrast to the polished office environment. She moved with quiet confidence as she approached the desk. "Of course, General." She picked up the first document, her official research authorization. "As you can see, Lieutenant Commander Morrison, my presence on this base was fully sanctioned at the highest levels. My research project on military workplace hierarchies was approved through all proper channels." Bradley's face had gone pale as he stared at the official letterhead and authorizing signatures. His attempt to paint her as an infiltrator was crumbling before his eyes. "Over the past 6 months," Dolores continued, her voice steady and professional, "I've documented 37 separate incidents of workplace abuse involving you, Lieutenant Commander." She laid out photographs, witness statements, and security camera stills in neat rows. These include 12 incidents of verbal harassment, 8 instances of physical intimidation, and 17 cases of creating a hostile work environment. Bradley's eyes darted between the evidence, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. This is all taken out of context," he stammered. Dolores pulled out a USB drive. "This contains security footage from the past 3 months. Particularly interesting is the coffee incident from last week." She inserted the drive into the General's computer, and the wall screen came to life with crystal-clear footage of Bradley throwing his coffee at her. "The base security system records audio as well," she noted, pressing play. Bradley's voice filled the room. "Worthless civilian trash." The recording captured every word of his tirade in high fidelity. "We have similar footage of your assault on Staff Sergeant Valdez," Dolores continued, switching to another video file. The screen showed Bradley shoving Rita, his face contorted with rage. "Notice how this incident occurred less than 24 hours after the first coffee incident. This establishes a clear pattern of escalating behavior." General Blackwood leaned forward, his expression grave. "The documentation is extensive, Morrison. Mrs. Chen Blackwood has compiled witness statements from 23 different base personnel, including 6 officers who reported your behavior through official channels." Dolores pulled out another folder. "These are the psychological impact statements from affected personnel. 5 individuals have requested transfers citing a hostile work environment. 3 have sought counseling." She laid each statement on the desk with careful precision. "The pattern shows systematic abuse of authority affecting morale across multiple departments." Bradley's attempt at composure was cracking. "This is a setup," he protested weakly. "She deliberately provoked these incidents." "By what? Doing her job?" General Blackwood's voice was sharp. "The footage shows routine workplace situations that you escalated into confrontations. Mrs. Chen Blackwood never initiated any of these incidents." Dolores pulled out one final document, Bradley's security complaint against her. "This attempted frame-up demonstrates the exact behavior pattern my research examines. When confronted with loss of power, abusive authority figures often resort to false allegations and attempted character assassination." She placed the complaint alongside her research authorization. "Every photograph I took, every note I made, was logged and approved through proper channels. Your attempt to weaponize security protocols against legitimate research only proves my findings about how power can be misused." Bradley slumped in his chair as the weight of evidence crushed his last desperate defense. The security complaint that he'd hoped would discredit Dolores had instead become the final piece of evidence against him. "The investigation has expanded beyond just your individual conduct," General Blackwood said, his tone severe. "Mrs. Chen Blackwood's research has exposed systemic issues in how we handle workplace abuse and power dynamics. Your case will serve as a catalyst for base-wide reforms." Dolores gathered her documentation with the same methodical care she'd shown in collecting it. "My research isn't about targeting individuals, Lieutenant Commander. It's about understanding how institutional structures can either prevent or enable abuse of power. Your actions provided a perfect case study." The general stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "The Inspector General's office will receive Mrs. Chen Blackwood's complete findings. I suggest you contact your union representative, Morrison. You'll need legal counsel for what's coming." Bradley remained seated, staring at the empty desk where moments before, the evidence of his downfall had been laid bare. His attempted frame-up hadn't just failed, it had backfired spectacularly, becoming the final nail in his own coffin. The very power he'd wielded so carelessly had been turned against him through nothing more than careful documentation and patient observation. "You may leave now, Lieutenant Commander," General Blackwood said firmly. Bradley stood on shaky legs, his carefully maintained military bearing completely abandoned. As he walked toward the door, he passed Dolores, who was still wearing the custodial uniform he'd viewed with such contempt. She met his eyes with the same quiet dignity she'd shown throughout their every encounter, even when he'd been at his worst. In that moment, Bradley finally understood. His power had always been an illusion, maintained only through others' tolerance of his abuse. Dolores had stripped away that illusion not through confrontation or force, but through the simple act of bearing witness and keeping record. Bradley Morrison sat in his darkened office, staring at the disciplinary papers scattered across his desk. The words "pending court-martial" and "conduct unbecoming" blurred before his eyes. His once pristine career was crumbling, and desperation clawed at his mind. He pulled out his phone and checked the training schedule for the day. Combat readiness drills were scheduled in Building 17, a 3-story concrete structure used for urban warfare simulations. His hands trembled as he pulled up the building's maintenance logs. "One hero moment," he muttered to himself. "That's all it takes to turn this around." The maintenance access codes were still in his system. They hadn't yet stripped his security clearances. Bradley's fingers moved quickly over his keyboard, accessing the building's environmental controls. With a few keystrokes, he disabled several safety systems, including the emergency sprinklers and backup lighting. "Just enough danger to look good," he reassured himself. "Create a small crisis, rush in, save the day. They'll have to reconsider the court-martial then." At 0900 hours, 3 squads of soldiers entered Building 17 for their scheduled training exercise. Bradley watched from his office window as they filed in, their instructors following behind. He waited 15 minutes before triggering his sabotage sequence. The first sign that something was wrong came when thick smoke began pouring from the building's second-floor windows. Bradley had only meant to trigger the smoke machines used in training, but he'd accidentally crossed some wires in the electrical system. Real flames erupted from an overloaded circuit board, quickly spreading through the walls. "No, no, no," Bradley whispered, watching in horror as the situation spiraled out of control. This wasn't supposed to happen. The smoke was supposed to be artificial, the danger controlled. Shouts of genuine panic echoed across the parade ground. The training exercise had turned into a real emergency. Soldiers began streaming out of the building's ground floor exits, but Bradley could see figures still trapped on the upper floors, waving frantically from windows now clouded with actual smoke. The disabled sprinkler system, meant only to add drama to his rescue, now prevented any automatic fire suppression. The backup lighting he'd shut down left the interior stairwells in darkness, making evacuation even more dangerous. "Help!" a voice called from a second-floor window. "The stairs are blocked." Bradley stood frozen at his window, watching his hero moment transform into a potential tragedy. 7 soldiers remained trapped on the upper floors, their escape routes cut off by his sabotage. The flames were spreading faster now, feeding on old wooden fixtures and training materials. Base security alarms began blaring. Fire trucks roared across the parade ground, their sirens piercing the morning air. Bradley could hear the trapped soldiers coughing, their voices growing more desperate as smoke filled the upper floors. "The emergency exits are jammed," someone shouted. Another of Bradley's safety modifications had backfired, turning what should have been backup escape routes into death traps. Fire crews deployed their equipment with practiced efficiency, but the disabled systems slowed their efforts. Every safety feature Bradley had turned off to manufacture his crisis now complicated the real emergency response. "There are people still inside." A sergeant major was directing rescue efforts, pointing out the trapped soldiers to the firefighters. "The whole electrical system is malfunctioning." Bradley's breath caught in his throat as he watched a young private stumble and nearly fall from a smoke-filled window. This wasn't the controlled crisis he'd planned. There was no hero moment waiting here, only the possibility of genuine tragedy born from his desperate need to save his own reputation. The base fire chief arrived on scene, immediately calling for additional support. "We've got multiple system failures," he shouted into his radio. "Building 17's safety protocols are completely offline." Bradley's hands shook as he tried to reverse the sabotage through his computer, but his hasty modifications had caused cascading failures throughout the building's systems. Each attempt to restore power or reactivate the sprinklers only seemed to make things worse. The flames were visible now through multiple windows. The trapped soldiers had retreated to one corner of the third floor, pressing wet cloths to their faces as smoke billowed around them. Fire crews were setting up rescue ladders, but the building's architecture made reaching some windows difficult. "Stay back from the windows," fire crews shouted instructions to the trapped soldiers. "We're coming up." Bradley watched, paralyzed, as his career-saving scheme threatened to cost actual lives. The severity of what he'd done hit him with physical force. This wasn't about his reputation anymore. Real people were in danger because of his actions. Through the chaos of rescue operations, Bradley noticed base security personnel entering his building. They moved with purpose, heading straight for his office. His sabotage hadn't gone unnoticed. The system logs would show exactly who had accessed the building controls. The horror of what he'd done kept him rooted in place as footsteps approached his office. His desperate attempt to save his career had instead revealed the darkest truth about his character. He hadn't just abused his authority this time. He'd weaponized it against innocent soldiers who trusted the system to protect them. The office door burst open behind him, but Bradley kept staring at the burning building. He could still hear the shouts of trapped soldiers, could still see the flames he'd accidentally sparked with his reckless sabotage. His final grasp at redemption had instead become his most damning act. Dolores Chen Blackwood was walking her usual cleaning route when the alarms began blaring. She rushed to the nearest window, her heart stopping at the sight of flames erupting from Building 17. The sound of screaming soldiers sent chills down her spine. Rita Valdez appeared beside her, still holding her mop. "Those are real flames," Rita said, her military training evident in her sharp assessment, "and the sprinklers aren't activating." They watched as Bradley Morrison burst from the headquarters building, running full speed toward the parking lot instead of toward the emergency. His face was pale with panic, his polished demeanor completely shattered. "Coward!" Rita spat, already moving toward the burning building. Dolores matched her stride, both women discarding their cleaning equipment as they ran. As they approached, they could hear the trapped soldiers more clearly. "Help! We can't get down!" The voices came from the third floor, where smoke poured from partially opened windows. Fire crews struggled with equipment, cursing the disabled systems that complicated their rescue efforts. Rita's eyes narrowed as she surveyed the scene, her special forces training taking over. "The north stairwell might still be passable. I know this building's layout." Dolores nodded, her research-oriented mind quickly processing the situation. The maintenance access shaft could provide a secondary route if the stairs are blocked. Without hesitation, they grabbed emergency breathing masks from a nearby fire truck and sprinted toward the building's side entrance. A security officer tried to stop them, but Rita's military bearing emerged as she barked, "Special Forces training, sir! We know the building!" Inside, the smoke was thick but still navigable on the ground floor. They could hear the trapped soldiers coughing above them. Rita led the way to the maintenance shaft, her movements precise despite the chaos around them. "This connects all 3 floors," Rita explained, pulling open the access panel. "Maintenance staff use it to move equipment. It's tight, but it's ventilated separately from the main building." They climbed quickly, the shaft's metal rungs hot under their hands. When they reached the 3rd floor, they could hear the soldiers just on the other side of the wall. Rita kicked open the access door, revealing 7 soldiers huddled in a smoke-filled corner. "Over here!" Dolores called out, her voice firm and clear through her mask. "We've got a safe route down!" The soldiers turned toward her voice, hope replacing panic in their eyes. Rita took charge of the evacuation, her combat experience showing in every confident movement. Single file, quick but careful. The shafts stable but narrow. One by one, they helped the soldiers into the maintenance shaft. Dolores positioned herself halfway down, creating a relay system to guide them safely to the ground floor. Rita stayed up top, ensuring no one was left behind. The heat was intensifying, and parts of the ceiling began to crack ominously. As the last soldier entered the shaft, a burning beam crashed down behind them. Rita pushed Dolores through the access door just in time, pulling it shut against the surge of flames. They descended rapidly, the shaft now filled with coughing soldiers moving as quickly as they safely could. When they reached the bottom, emergency medical teams were waiting to assist the rescued personnel. Outside, they learned that Bradley Morrison had fled the base entirely. Security cameras had caught him running to his car and speeding away, leaving behind both his responsibilities and the chaos he had created. "He did this," Rita said quietly, watching the firefighters finally get the blaze under control. "The systems were sabotaged. This was deliberate." Dolores nodded, her researcher's mind already connecting the dots. He was desperate enough to risk lives trying to save his career, but when it went wrong, he ran instead of helping. They stood together, covered in soot and sweat, as medical teams treated the soldiers for smoke inhalation. Each rescued service member was alive and relatively unharmed thanks to their quick action and Rita's knowledge of the building. Fire investigators were already examining the scene, their faces grim as they discovered the extent of Bradley's sabotage. The disabled sprinklers, the locked emergency exits, the compromised electrical systems all pointed to a deliberate attempt to create a controlled crisis that had spiraled dangerously out of control. Base security had already set up roadblocks and alerted local law enforcement. Bradley Morrison, the man who had built his career on family connections and intimidation, was now a fugitive who had endangered the lives of American soldiers. Rita looked at Dolores, a new respect in her eyes. "Not bad for a sociology researcher," she said with a tired smile. "You've got more courage than that polished coward ever had." Dolores returned the smile, equally impressed by Rita's leadership during the crisis. "And you proved that rank doesn't define character. You may be wearing a janitor's uniform, but you're still every inch a soldier." They watched as the last of the flames were extinguished, both women knowing that Bradley's desperate attempt to save himself had instead revealed the true measure of everyone involved. While he fled in disgrace, they had stayed to face the danger he created, proving that real strength came from character, not rank or position. 3 days after the fire at Fort Braxton, Bradley Morrison sat in a holding cell at the Military Detention Center. His perfectly pressed uniform had been replaced by an orange jumpsuit, and his commanding presence had withered into a slumped posture of defeat. The security footage from his attempted escape had been played on every local news channel, showing him fleeing while soldiers were trapped in the burning building he had sabotaged. Federal investigators moved swiftly, building an airtight case against him. The evidence was overwhelming. Security cameras had captured him tampering with the sprinkler systems, and his fingerprints were found on the disabled emergency exits. Computer records showed he had accessed the building's maintenance controls using his security clearance, methodically creating the conditions for what he had intended to be a controlled crisis. "Lieutenant Commander Morrison," the lead investigator said during his formal interview, "we have documented proof of your systematic abuse of power, culminating in the deliberate endangerment of United States military personnel. How do you respond to these charges?" Bradley's arrogance had finally crumbled. "I never meant for anyone to get hurt," he whispered, his voice trembling. "It was supposed to be a minor incident. I was going to be the hero." The investigation expanded beyond the fire incident. Dolores Chen Blackwood's meticulous research documentation provided a foundation for a deeper probe into the cultural problems at Fort Braxton. Her recordings, witness statements, and detailed notes painted a picture of systematic abuse enabled by an environment of unchecked authority. General Harrison Blackwood called a base-wide assembly to address the situation. "What happened here represents a complete failure of leadership oversight," he announced to the gathered personnel. "Lieutenant Commander Morrison's actions were not just individual failures, but symptoms of a broader problem we must address." The criminal charges against Bradley mounted quickly. The military prosecutor read them out in court. Willful endangerment of military personnel, sabotage of military equipment, abuse of authority, conduct unbecoming an officer, and attempted obstruction of justice. Each charge carried serious penalties, with the endangerment and sabotage charges alone facing potential decades in military prison. Bradley's family connections, which had once seemed unassailable, crumbled under scrutiny. The Department of Defense launched a comprehensive review of all contracts with Morrison Defense Technologies. Investigators discovered irregularities in contract awards and evidence of preferential treatment linked to Bradley's position. The Morrison family's preferential status in defense contracting is hereby suspended pending full investigation, the Pentagon spokesperson announced. All current contracts will undergo immediate audit and review. Bradley's father, CEO of Morrison Defense Technologies, publicly disowned his son's actions. "Our company has served this nation's military with honor for 3 generations," he stated at a press conference. "We cannot and will not defend actions that endangered the lives of American soldiers." The military tribunal moved with unprecedented speed. Bradley's discharge proceedings began even before his criminal trial concluded. His service record, once spotless through careful manipulation, was now stained with the truth of his conduct. "This board finds Lieutenant Commander Bradley Morrison guilty of all charges," the tribunal president declared. "We hereby recommend immediate dishonorable discharge from the United States Navy." The cultural reforms at Fort Braxton began immediately. General Blackwood implemented new oversight procedures and reporting systems for abuse of power. Regular surveys of civilian staff and enlisted personnel became mandatory, with anonymous reporting channels established to protect whistleblowers. Rita Valdez was reinstated to her former rank, her PTSD now viewed through a lens of understanding rather than stigma. She became a key figure in implementing the new reforms, using her unique perspective from both enlisted and civilian positions to bridge communication gaps. "The military is built on honor, duty, and respect," Rita told a group of officers during a mandatory leadership seminar. "When we forget that these values apply to everyone, regardless of rank or position, we betray our core principles." Dolores's research became the foundation for a military-wide study on leadership culture and power dynamics. Her experience working undercover as a cleaning staff member provided invaluable insights into the invisible hierarchies that had enabled Bradley's behavior. The final blow to Bradley's world came during his sentencing. The military judge looked down at him with stern disapproval. "Your actions represent the worst kind of betrayal of military values," she declared. "You not only abused your authority but deliberately endangered the lives of those you were sworn to lead. This court sentences you to 20 years in military prison." Bradley's carefully constructed world of privilege and power had completely unraveled. His family name, once a source of untouchable authority, became synonymous with corruption and cowardice. His father's company lost millions in canceled contracts, and their reputation in the defense industry was irreparably damaged. As Bradley was led away in chains, Dolores and Rita watched from the gallery. The man who had once thrown coffee at them and treated them as beneath contempt was now facing the consequences of his actions in full measure. His destruction was complete. His career ended in disgrace, his family connections severed, and his future confined to a prison cell. The reforms at Fort Braxton continued, creating a new standard for military leadership culture. The base that had once enabled Bradley's abuse of power became a model for systematic change, proving that true strength came from character rather than rank or connection. 6 months after Bradley Morrison's sentencing, Fort Braxton had transformed into something entirely new. The base hummed with a different energy, one of respect, dignity, and genuine leadership rather than intimidation and fear. Dolores Chen Blackwood stood at a podium in the base's main conference room, presenting the findings of her doctoral research to a packed audience of military leaders, policymakers, and academic colleagues. Her presentation screen displayed graphs and charts, but the heart of her research lay in the human stories she had gathered. What we discovered at Fort Braxton wasn't just about one man's abuse of power, Dolores explained, her quiet dignity commanding attention just as it had during her time undercover. It was about the invisible hierarchies that allow such behavior to flourish. By understanding these patterns, we can create meaningful change. The Pentagon had already begun implementing her recommendations across military installations nationwide. New training programs emphasized respect for all personnel, regardless of rank or position. Anonymous reporting systems, similar to the ones General Blackwood had established at Fort Braxton, were becoming standard practice throughout the armed forces. In the front row, Rita Valdez sat in her restored staff sergeant's uniform, her combat decorations gleaming under the conference room lights. The past months had brought profound changes to her life. With proper psychological support and a command structure that now understood PTSD as a battle injury rather than a weakness, Rita had flourished. "The military finally recognized that my PTSD wasn't a failure," Rita shared during her portion of the presentation. "It was a natural response to combat experience. With the right support, I've learned to manage it while continuing to serve." Rita's journey back to active duty had become a model for other veterans struggling with similar challenges. The base had established a comprehensive mental health program that combined professional counseling with peer support groups. Veterans could now seek help without fear of stigma or career repercussions. After the presentation, Dolores and Rita walked together through the same corridors where their unlikely friendship had begun. The cleaning staff they passed wore new uniforms, designed with input from the workers themselves that reflected their essential role in base operations. "Remember when these halls felt like a battlefield?" Rita asked, smiling at a group of civilian maintenance workers chatting easily with uniformed personnel. Dolores nodded. "Now they feel like what they should have been all along, a place where every person's contribution is valued." The changes at Fort Braxton went beyond surface-level policies. General Blackwood had implemented a revolutionary leadership training program that required officers to spend time working alongside enlisted personnel and civilian staff. The experience helped break down artificial barriers and build genuine understanding across ranks. In the base cafeteria, officers and enlisted personnel now shared the same dining space. The strict segregation that had once defined meal times had given way to an atmosphere of casual professional respect. Civilian staff members sat comfortably among military personnel, their conversations reflecting genuine camaraderie rather than forced politeness. "Dr. Chen Blackwood," called out a young lieutenant, using Dolores's newly earned academic title. "Your research changed how I think about leadership. Thank you for showing us a better way." Dolores's doctoral dissertation had earned highest honors from her university and was already being incorporated into military leadership curricula nationwide. Her work had revealed how simple changes in daily interactions could transform an entire institutional culture. Rita's own transformation had been equally profound. As she led training sessions for other veterans dealing with PTSD, her experiences helped shape the military's new approach to mental health. Her office door displayed both her combat decorations and her certification as a peer counselor. "We're building something new here," Rita explained to a group of visiting officers, "a culture where strength isn't about domination, it's about lifting each other up." The base's quarterly satisfaction surveys told the story of transformation through data. Morale had skyrocketed across all personnel categories. Retention rates improved, particularly among civilian staff. Productivity increased as people felt valued and respected in their roles. Dolores's research findings had rippled out far beyond Fort Braxton. Military bases across the country were adopting similar reforms, creating standardized protocols for addressing abuse of power and promoting respectful leadership. Her work had sparked a quiet revolution in military culture. The real change, Dolores explained during a national conference, comes from recognizing that every person's dignity matters. When we build systems that protect and value everyone, we create stronger institutions. For Rita, the changes meant more than just professional restoration. She had found her true calling in helping other veterans navigate their own healing journeys. Her combat experience, combined with her personal growth, made her uniquely qualified to bridge the gap between military tradition and necessary reform. Fort Braxton had become a model installation, hosting delegations from other bases eager to learn from their example. The cultural transformation proved that positive change was possible without compromising military effectiveness or discipline. If anything, the new atmosphere of mutual respect had enhanced the base's operational capabilities. As Dolores and Rita stood together on the parade ground, where they had once been considered invisible, they saw the living proof of their impact. Enlisted personnel and officers mingled naturally during breaks. Civilian staff moved through the base with confidence and pride. The rigid hierarchies that had enabled abuse had been replaced by genuine professional respect. "We did more than stop one man's abuse," Rita said, watching the activity around them. "We helped create something better for everyone who serves." Dolores smiled, thinking of all the stories she had gathered during her research. That's what real change looks like. Not just ending something bad, but building something good in its place. Thanks for watching. Stories like this shape us in ways we don't always expect. If something resonated, subscribe. I'm back tomorrow with another one worth hearing.